Welcome to Studying Law Around the World. I'm Claudio Klaus. In each episode, I talk with lawyers, law students, and professors from different parts of the world to talk about legal education, careers, and what the profession looks like in real life. We talk about the hard parts, the surprises, and the decisions that shaped their paths. Whether you're planning to study abroad, thinking about working in another legal system, or just curious about how law works around the world, this podcast is for you. Today I'm hosting Kenny Alami. He has a very, very interesting career and an interesting process and company that he's been building for law firms specifically. His company is called Nod Operations. And I'm so excited to learn a little bit from you, Kenny. Thank you so much for making the time to be in the podcast today.
Pretty excited to chat. I think it's going to be fun.
Awesome. And to start a conversation today, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Sure. So yeah, name is Kenny Alami. I'm the founder of No Operations. So you can think of us as a tech firm, and we help professional services firms. Essentially, whatever they can do with a computer, we help them do it with a computer rather than they do it manually. So we worked with 60 something clients, usually between 4 and 50 people in the team. And to give you a bit of the high level vision that we have for the future, which we think is exciting and is getting closer and closer, is really to make work as fun as possible and potentially, just being almost not work so that, you get to enjoy working with your clients, with your team. But at the moment, the mission is really helping people, leverage technology and AI in their businesses as much as possible so they get rid of the tedious and repetitive work.
Amazing. So I see there's a lot of an intersection of management, AI, project management. There's lots of things that come about in that topic. And I wanted to ask you to tell us a little more about your experience with technology and even how that shaped the approach that you have to business operations nowadays.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the approach is really to make it useful to humans, to people working in those firms is really the big thing because with the advent of tech and AI and in the Silicon Valley, you feel like everyone wants to use tech to solve everything all the time. And sometimes you realize that people don't understand the problems that they're facing in businesses. So I find that really the most important before even thinking about, hey, do we need technology or which tool we need, which tech we need, it's really to understand, okay, what's the problem that we are facing, what are the problems that we're trying to face, but mostly also, we are working with clients. So when you're working with clients is, hey, what's providing value to the people that we're working with? And then once you have that and you identify, okay, like, we know what would bring value to our clients, then you can retroactively and retro engineer from there and say, okay, this is the problem that we have to solve to provide that value. And then what kind of tools and solutions can we, just put in place to solve those problems? So really the approach is, yeah, taking it from that perspective. So I'm like, okay, what's the value that we'd be providing to our clients and to the team, not the other way around.
Amazing. So I did read some of the things you've put out there on LinkedIn and on your website. And I think that one of the things that I saw that kind of repeats a few times is that, many business owners, probably law firm partners and operators, administrators, they can feel stuck despite having really, thriving operations, but really on the administrative side, there's some complications, right, that make it feel like things are not progressing as well as they should. And
Mhm.
I'm curious, in your experience, what you've been seeing around, what are some of the most common bottlenecks that you see in business operations, especially in the law firm context?
Yeah, I feel the most common one is really, being too reactive. Most people, I think you could throw a stone out there and most people, like you would just hit like a busy person. Like everyone is super busy all the time. And nowadays it's even worse because there's just so much information, so much to consume, so much going on, a lot of change. And it's just overwhelming and everyone seems to be extremely busy. And I find that a lot of the times, people are very reactive and they don't necessarily take the time to, just carve maybe 30 minutes or an hour to really try to be a bit more strategic, reflect on their systems, reflect on, the experiences that they have with clients or even, just maybe have a bit more of those conversations on like, hey, how can we do better? Or what can we change? But also, like stemming out of that, then, documenting all those things to make them easier to train other people, in their firms to, solve those problems faster, and things like that. So, and that creates, a bunch of cascading problems when you get into that situation because it's just hard to, when you're reacting all the time, it's just hard to take the time to pause and yeah, just to, solve those problems strategically and have a clear mind and be clear headed.
Absolutely. No, I can totally see that. I think in more, colloquial terms, we would say usually you're always kind of putting out fires, right? So
Yeah.
there's not really like a structure for planning and for being able to follow the routine you've planned if kind of every day there's new urgent things that show up and then you kind of become reactive to that, right? So I really
Mhm.
appreciate you bringing that up. I totally agree with that, right? I see that happening. And when you bring the aspect of, having a good sense of what are the actual problems a business has or what's the lack that's happening there. I'm curious, how did, discovering tools and now specifically talking about, automation tools change the way you saw these problems and maybe even your career and the impacts that you've been having with your clients as those come into place.
So I started in operations and project management, and I've always, been tinkering with technology since a very young age. So, I've always had a finger trying to, learning how to code, how to use. At some point, I was trying to make some games and stuff like that. So I've really been like into technology, but really where I'm coming from is project management, the really understanding like, okay, how do we organize ourselves to deliver a project and just make sure that, we stay on track and we think strategically whenever something comes along. And I think that's been pretty valuable rather than, coming from a purely technical side because technology is just so complex that, you can lose yourself in the details. And I'm assuming, you probably also gone through that when maybe you use like Cloud Code or like those coding tools. And then you just go through like a rabbit hole. And once you're in there, you just lose track of like, yeah, okay, but why am I doing that? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why is it useful? What's the goal that I'm trying to achieve? And how is that aligning with that goal, what I'm doing right now? So, kind of the combination of the two is quite useful in the sense of asking those questions of like, okay, what I'm doing right now is it really helpful, for the firm? Is that really helping the people to make their work more efficient? Or are we just, using AI or tech because, everyone's using AI or tech, or is it really, solving a problem that we have? So in that sense, I feel it's quite useful not to be bogged down by those details too much and being able to, see kind of the horizon.
Fantastic. No, very, very interesting to take that into consideration. I love that. When I think about law firms and I think about the overall like things that are seen in the media and sometimes how it's portrayed, there's this impression maybe that law firms are a very traditional space or that it's very conservative, risk averse, and in some instances can be complicated when it comes to technology and all of that. But it's obvious that as the world evolves and maybe even as COVID made it kind of impossible not to, more and more law firms of all sizes are really leaning into technology big time. So I wanted to ask you a little more, how have you helped legal teams to adopt technology? And I'm sure there's, all these concerns about compliance, quality, and so forth, privacy. But what are some of the steps that you go through? And maybe if you can share with us, a little more about, the work you've done so far and what kind of tools specifically that looks like.
For sure. I mean, I think what's the most important, I would say, is picking the right tools and the right foundation. And what I mean by that is, you don't want to build your firm on Word and spreadsheets in terms of, the business side of things. You don't want to have, all your invoices stuck in Word or keeping track of your project in a spreadsheet because it's brittle and maybe it would work for one or two persons, but once you're past a certain size, there's good software and there's people that have been thinking about the problems like, keeping track of cases, or keeping track of projects, or keeping track of your sales, the relationships that you have, or the leads that you bring in the firm. And you essentially, if you just use a spreadsheet, you're kind of trying to almost spend the same amount of time, rebuild those tools in a spreadsheet, whereas like you could, you know, just get one off the shelf and get straight off a tool that's very efficient and allows you to solve those problems way faster, like keeping track of your leads, or sending contracts automatically, keeping track of your deadlines in a case management software, things like that. So I would say that's probably the most important, making sure that you have those tools, that they are obviously have a good user experience, so it's pleasant to learn them and to navigate them. And the other thing that are kind of still on the business requirements side is also making sure that they're open. And what I mean by that is that they have what's called an API, which is essentially a way to connect your tools automatically. So, you can transfer data, but you can also do automated actions in it. It's going to be even more important to make sure that you have those open software when, people start having like AI agents, and you can ask an AI like, hey, just like, go get this data in this tool and go do that other thing on that tool, or summarize all the data from those 4 different tools. And if you have all the software that are closed, and essentially like, hey, your AI can't have access to any of that stuff, you're just going to be way slower than those people that, have those tools at their disposal. So that's kind of like, the business requirement side. And then obviously you have, let's say, the more security side of things, compliance side of things. That's also super important because, we're talking about putting data in the cloud on a server somewhere, or, getting data out or in of a software. So, when the data is in your tool, you just want to make sure that it's secure enough that no one can get in it and steal your data, or do anything with it. And similarly, when you take it in and out of a software, you want to make sure that no one can catch it. So when you choose a software, you need to make sure you do a bit of research on like, hey, how are they handling my data? Is it safe? I believe you need to make sure you understand at least the big lines of it. Like, hey, I can, assess quickly if a software is safe or not by, seeing like those requirements. So then you don't expose yourself to maybe some guy that just vab coded a CRM, and you just gave it money, and then somehow it's super dangerous because anyone can enter it. So yeah, you just want to make sure, you do a bit of due diligence there, and maybe learn a bit about, what makes the software secure. Don't need to be a cyber expert, but knowing the big trends and the big lines are important.
Amazing. And I think that one of the interesting things that we can see now with AI and with this advancement is that even if you're not necessarily well versed in these tools, you can always maybe go and ask an AI bot about like how to learn those or how to do these assessments. Recently, I've participated with a project that basically was creating some of the guidelines of um, how do you even choose software when it comes to legal, because really with all the hype going on, there really needs to be some kind of a playbook, right, for being able to buy AI. And it's a little different than just buying softwares, right? So it was basically an idea of having legal benchmarks for an evaluation framework, so what to ask vendors and all of that. And it was very interesting to see how the profession kind of came together to really like bring better standards, right? So everyone kind of knew what was going on. Everybody's trying to figure it out, but it's really good when this kind of collaboration comes about. And on the other hand, I feel like technology evolves at such a pace that we are kind of always trying to catch up to it, right? Obviously, everywhere, every third article, every third news, it's something about AI. So from your experience, when is AI the right solution, and when are those simple systems more effective, be it from the cost side or from really the functionality that it has to be done?
So there's a spectrum from, if you're, let's say you have a specific, process, if it's very deterministic. And by that, I mean, if the rules are always the same, let's say if you're always copy pasting the same thing and it's always the same info that you're copy pasting, that means it's very deterministic. And then you have on the other side of the spectrum, things that are a bit more uncertain. So you don't the outcome that you're going to get may vary widely. I feel that on the side where it's very uncertain, AI is usually better. And on the side where it's very deterministic, then you can use, tools, code or scripts or Zapier, some of those things that it's easier to have specific rules in place. To give you an example, at some point there was a family law firm in California, and they had something like 50,000 names in the database that they had to do conflict checks on. And it was pretty tedious because they were doing that in HubSpot, and the search in HubSpot is not very good. So there was a potential, to miss something. And they approached me and they were like, "Hey, we'd like to use AI to do that." But quickly I realized like, hey, like 50,000 names, fitting that to an AI, that sounds like it's going to be very slow. And the potential that it misses something is pretty high. So in the end, we ended up, not to be too technical, but putting everything in a database and finding a solution that's actually we've had for a bunch of years now before AI that is quite reliable, that just with code, a way to search all those names and find similarities in the names, or even like in the sounds if there are similar sounds. And so there are tools to do that that literally would happen in milliseconds rather than potentially minutes with an AI. So in those specific instances, there are tools that we've had for a decade or so before AI came around that we can use to address those use cases. But on the other hand, let's say you're always encountering cases that are, very different from each other. And maybe in the example of contracts that are widely different, in widely different industries, you can still extract principles like, for example, if you were to teach me how to analyze those contracts, you could do the same for an AI and, try to teach it and formalize that knowledge. And they say like, here's the contract, go through it and help me, analyze it. Here's the things that you need to look out for. In that case, AI is a bit, more useful because you had to just like create all those rules and script them in some sort of program. It would just take you forever, right? And it doesn't make sense to
Amazing. Well, thank you for going a little bit more deep into that. I liked that. I think you used the word superpower to describe, when operations become the superpower for legal businesses. So they go from, a problem, a bottleneck, a complication in the business to being the business's superpower. And honestly, I see this very often when I read on LinkedIn. There's a lot of thought leaders that constantly talk about the importance of invoicing and how it's such a struggle, it seems, throughout the profession, throughout different size of firms and all of that. So I'm curious, can you give some examples of a business that transform in that way, making really that operation from a bottleneck, from a difficult, painful thing to really that superpower of the business.
Well, there's a good example that I came across in the last couple of weeks that I thought was pretty interesting. Probably heard about him. I don't remember the name of his firm, but I think his name was Zach Shapiro. I think his article went everywhere in the legal world, but I really liked what he built and what he highlighted. So, I think he's been using like Claude in general, like Claude Cowork and Claude Code. And essentially what he's done is, he's been talking with those tools a lot and having lots of chats, and really he's brainstorm with the AI a way to formalize all his knowledge in what they call different skills, which are essentially just a collection of text files that just explain have your processes and your instructions and all your principles, maybe references on what good looks like, so an AI can reference that. And now, I mean, he claims that now he can just send a contract or something like that, and then the AI just like does all the work automatically. But what I liked and what highlighted, I feel like, is where this is going is that, I don't think it's not natural for us to learn software. Like, it's not natural for us to be like, oh, I'm going to click here. If I want to get an invoice, I have where do I get this invoice and how do I issue an invoice? I have to click in this menu and maybe I have to right click here. Then I need to search the name, but I don't remember the name. Where was it? And like, I don't, it doesn't feel natural to do that. Whereas, talking out loud, like I'm talking to you, you've been doing that for hundreds of thousands of years, right? So what I liked about what he was saying is like he couldn't learn software. And I heard that so often where people are like, hey, I just in law firm, they're like, I don't have the time to learn software and people buy software but don't use it. And I'm like, yeah, it just makes a lot of sense to be like, hey, I just talk to the AI and just helps me figure things out, helps me do my work. I can brainstorm with it. And eventually you can have the AI do stuff in other softwares for you. So I feel like we can start doing that right now, and I feel this is kind of like the superpowers that he's describing, and I feel like he's probably also only scratching the surface of that, even though it's super impressive. It's like, hey, it's stuff that would take me days and that take me maybe hours in research and drafting, and then you can really focus on just providing that value and nurturing that relationship with your clients, making sure you're there. So I really like this story for that aspect of, yeah, been leveraging AI as being super useful, but also just, talking like you would talk to a human, and having a colleague just feels way more natural than, banging your head against software that you can't figure out.
For sure. No, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. When you look ahead now, what kind of trends in automation in operations are you most excited about, especially when we look at, small and mid-sized law firms?
I think, yeah, it is the AI agent. I think it was last year, yeah, last year where everyone was like, oh, it's the year of the AI agent, and everyone was talking about AI agents, but they were quite not there. And when you were looking at it, you're like, yeah, this is not, reliable or really great at what it's doing. And I think that's where it's going, it seems like. Because, it just makes more sense to, have something you talk to, whether it's on WhatsApp or on Slack or wherever, and that it can help you, do like you were talking about invoicing, like what would you have to logging into Clio and try to remember how to do it? I mean, if you're using Clio, or any of those other tools that you might be using for invoicing, why couldn't you just ask the AI like, hey, the unpaid, invoices for the last 3 months, and then the ones that are pending, send them over, or even have it done automatically like that. It feels like that's that's what you would want to do, so you don't have to just like have to do all those work that potentially a computer could do. Um, and that ties back to what I was telling you, like closer to the beginning of the conversation, like having those open software and making sure while the models are getting better and everyone's trying to figure out, making sure you have those tools that are open, that your processes or however you do, whether it's legal work or more on the business side of things, having everything documented, all your data safely organized, your files organized, your client data organized, so that when you can actually safely plug an agent into that, they know where things are. It's easy to figure out, like it would be easy for a human to figure out. So then you can actually leverage them rather than, putting an AI in the middle of that. It wouldn't understand, okay, what do I need to do? And where do I need to get those invoices or this client data or anything like that? You wouldn't be able to leverage it. So I would say, well, those capabilities are becoming greater and greater. Just making sure, you're getting ready and you have the foundations in place in your firm is probably a good call, because I think it's about to be very exciting and very powerful. I feel like very fast. So, being ready to catch that wave I feel is going to be very important.
Fantastic. Well, Kenny, thank you so much for making the time to be in the podcast and to share some of your thoughts and some of how this whole process works. I really appreciate you coming in the show.
Cheers. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you all in the next episode.